Frightened Samaritans accused the innocent girl of using black magic. Surprisingly, not so long ago, a young lady lived surrounded by understanding and kind people. Spring flowers were gradually blooming, and life seemed very happy and carefree. Almost every day she lived, the main character enjoyed the company of her loving family members. From her earliest years, dad and older brother were the center of this beautiful girl's world. But now the once happy, carefree life began to be covered with dark, thick clouds. The younger brother and father believed that, with their own strength, they would be able to protect the place of the monarch from bad people. However, even the most loyal comrades can turn out to be the most common traitors. Even the main character's husband, like a real hero, had to give his life in the war. The Duchy of Phytheria was thrown by its own ally, the sacred empire of Arteria, straight under the sword of the barbarian country of Kiltsi. The people are eager to give the head of the main character, hoping to appease the cruel ruler of the enemy state. Now the abandoned girl had no choice but to accept her unenviable fate, the last debt of the one who could not protect her possessions as well as their many inhabitants. But even if the girl is destined to die, she will never allow herself to be thrown to pieces in a foreign country. Suddenly, the main character felt like someone tried to plunge a knife into her back. The maid named Fulvia, who hated her mistress, did not try to restrain her feelings. If the noblewoman had not married Philip, he would not have had to die such a death. The fact is that on the very first night after the wedding, the main character's husband introduced his mistress. The maid Fulvia was his true love, whom he valued more than anything in the world. In the past, the main character rejected Emperor Kils's proposal to marry Philip, because for many years the young lady had been secretly in love with this nobleman. Feeling guilty before her lovers, the girl thanked the maid for her quick death. The main character, who was bleeding continuously, began to approach the maid. Frightened Fulvia feared that the young mistress would try to take revenge on her for the attack. The last blow, which became fatal, completely ruined the soul of the girl thrown to the mercy of her enemies. Before her death, the main character wished to never be born again, forever disappearing from other people's lives. She prayed to the Lord that she would not have to relive the nightmare of unrequited love. The visitor was angry because the employee of the establishment did not pay any attention to him at all. For some reason, the bank employee could not at all understand where exactly she was now. Meanwhile, the man continued to be angry at being kept waiting so long. The client wanted 150 gold to be deposited into his account and 50 to be exchanged for Milia currency. The excited employee began to quickly write down the banking transactions made. It was difficult to understand why so many clients allowed themselves to raise their voices and become indignant over little things. In order to reduce the tension in the room, the girl began to pronounce all her actions out loud. The worker handed over a certificate stating that 1 gold phyteria is equal to 3 gold and 30 silver milio. Having deducted the commission, the girl began to count the coins that she should give to the visitor. A few minutes later, the worker gave out 148 gold milia and 50 silver ones. The man, who did not even have time to understand what was happening, silently took the money. The client was once again convinced that the employees of Bank Toscaria are well versed in their business. Before, the girl could not even imagine that one day her abilities in mathematics would come in handy. The bank employee was happy about the absence of clients, but the good mood quickly disappeared when the boss appeared behind her. Absolutely all employees disliked the department manager, the grumpy and strict Lady Hortense. Obviously, the woman who had a lot of trouble was not in the best mood. The boss ordered her subordinate to return to her duties as quickly as possible. Suddenly, another client came into the bank and suggested that the young employee was being scolded because she was sleepy. This annoying guy had a unique ability to appear at the most inopportune times. Without even saying hello to the client, the girl began to quickly go into the utility room. However, the young lady stopped when she noticed that all the remaining employees were safely asleep. Bank employee Toscaria decided to hand over the lazy director to manager Hortensia. In order not to receive another reprimand, the man quickly began to justify his lunchtime nap. The girl had absolutely no intention of being the only victim of Hortense's general manager. Sometimes it seemed as if her unloved boss had real eyes growing on her back. The bank employee quickly began straightening her unruly hair in front of the dressing mirror. This girl was the only daughter of the Duke, the amethyst of Phyteria Adriana Erin Toscaria. Currently, as the crisis raged throughout the country, she continued to work undercover. Thanks to her mathematical knowledge, she was able to integrate quite easily into the bank. All the major changes in the life of the main character began to occur about a few months ago. After her unpleasant death, the girl was magically able to go back in time. Seeing a familiar reflection in the mirror, Adriana could not believe her own eyes. The noblewoman did not understand why she remained alive after a sharp knife wound. The last days of the main character's existence were very cruel and unfair. However, having left this mortal world instead of burning pain, the girl felt calm. Adriana will have to watch again as her shining glory crumbles and her closest associates turn out to be traitors. She will have to feel again this heartbreaking despair that permeates her life. It seemed as if the Almighty was mocking the unfortunate girl. Perhaps the noblewoman should die again, so that this nightmare can finally end. Suddenly, one of the servants knocked loudly, and then entered the main character's chambers. The maid Lucille reminded her mistress that the Duke was due to return today. According to the messenger, the gentleman and his son must be in time for dinner. The maid said that if the young lady did not come out to meet them, they would surely be very upset. The girl, who had only recently emerged from the darkness, could not yet calmly react to the light. Circumstances indicated that the life of the main character had not yet been destroyed. Before leaving the chambers, the girl needs to wash herself and put on her outfit. Adriana was very afraid that this calm would disappear again, and life would again be plunged into chaos. Surely by pretending the main character will not be able to experience her former happiness again. The servants informed their mistress that the Duke had arrived at the palace a few minutes ago. Hearing this news, the girl immediately rushed to the balcony, which was located in her chambers. For the first time, after a long time, the main character was finally able to see her family again. When the girl was 20 years old, her only younger brother died after falling from a horse, and her father died of an infection. Adriana guessed that there was something suspicious about their deaths, but all the trouble happened before she could dig anything out. Surrounded by despair, the young noblewoman had to live in the deepest loneliness. However, now she could see the calm and joyful faces of her family members. Having survived a terrible separation, the girl instantly rushed into the arms of her father. The Duke sincerely could not understand why his daughter began to behave so strangely. The brother told the sister that while the other knights were watching, the lady of the duchy must maintain her reputation. Usually the girl was angry at such comments, but now she was too happy about the appearance of her dead brother. The main character, who usually hid her feelings, rushed to hug Raniere. Pressed against her brother's chest, the girl began to shed tears of sincere happiness. The father began to be indignant, because it seemed to him that Raniere had upset his sister with his silence. Surely, if a young man is so cold, he will never be able to find a common language with girls. The father begged his only daughter to finally stop crying. The main character cried for a long time, because the hugs of her family members were so warm. During today's outing, the Duke and his son were able to catch a large deer. The prey, wounded by an arrow in the thigh, tried to escape, but experienced hunters quickly finished it off. Adriana truly admired what a professional her dear father was. The younger brother, wanting to change the topic of conversation, began talking about how his sister slept through her piano lessons. Instead of swearing the main character called Raniere a grumpy mommy, the father politely asked his daughter to listen to her brother and not fight over meaningless trifles. During today's hunt, Raniere was very worried about the well-being of his older sister. Adriana admired how courteous her beloved brother could be. Covered with a bright blush, the young man began to shyly hide his eyes to the side. The main character has not been present at such welcoming family evenings for a long time. Even if she wanted to commit suicide, she couldn't abandon her family so easily. We must live in order to continue to protect our family and be a support for them. Raniere began to talk about how Musel had asked the Duke to visit his bank in his spare time. The son could not accompany his father because he had fencing training planned tomorrow. Bank Toscaria, owned by the main character's family, provided the main income for the duchy. However, as soon as the girl is left alone, the bank will be the beginning of all her misfortunes. It was after her family went bankrupt that the duchy suffered its collapse. Adriana was not at all sure that her current life was a reality. However, if a girl has a chance to change everything, then she needs to take advantage of it. The main character asked her father if she could go to the bank with him tomorrow. Phytheria is the amethyst of a prosperous continent, thanks to the Estelle River, which flows from east to west. Due to its advantageous location, many significant banks settled in this duchy. Of course, among them was the famous Bank Toscaria, owned by the family of the main character. The business of their duchy was the largest in the eastern part of the entire continent. Bank Toscaria, unlike other institutions, could boast of the largest sales volume. It would not even be an exaggeration to say that this place fed the entire Feteria. The main character had 4 years left before her dukedom collapsed. Adriana must do everything possible to change the future forever. The Toscaria Bank Musel greeted his guests with a smile on his face. The man was glad that my lady agreed to visit such a wretched place. By the way, Musel came from an unknown family of low-grade aristocrats. The father of the main character trusted his money to this man without any doubt. But after the death of Adriana's family, he tried to force her to marry with collateral in the form of all the bank's assets. Of course, the main character refused such a smooth proposal from the manager. The Duke said that today his lovely daughter decided to come on an excursion to the bank. Musel was surprised by the appearance of such a guest, since in his opinion, girls were created exclusively for a successful marriage. However, the Duke always wanted his children to help him with his financial affairs. The bank manager hoped that he would be able to steal as many funds as possible. The cunning man asked his distinguished guests to follow him to the main office. At this point, this successful banking enterprise was about 20 years old. The meeting that the main character attended was rather a formality since the father completely relied on the opinion of Musel. The Duke spent more energy on developing his territories and knights than on the affairs of the bank. The brother, being the main heir, also did not show interest since he was involved in politics and fencing. The main character believed that Musel's activities should be closely monitored. Surely this vile man had something to do with the death of her father and younger brother. Kielce Empire requested that the duchy grant them a small loan. To the east, proud of its 1,000-year history, lies the sacred empire of Arteria. And in the western part, a great power was formed, intending to quickly increase its power, the Kielce Empire. Rumors often circulated among ordinary people that the ruler of this state was a real tyrant. In a past life, a crazy emperor proposed to the main character. However, after she refused, a terrible war was declared on Feteria. The people blamed Adriana, the witch who seduced the emperor and provoked the war. Angry people who did not know their own sins wanted to deal with the unfortunate girl. Before her death, the main character had to hide in the estate from the inhabitants of her duchy. However, even so frightened, the girl could not hide from her terrifying fate. The family of the current Empress Kielce asked to lend them 3 million gold pieces. They promised to pay off the entire debt with bribes they would receive from the aristocrats later. Kielce Empire recently, the Duke, not wanting to waste time, agreed with his subordinate's proposal. However, the main character was categorically against the bank issuing a loan. When it came to financial matters, Adriana could demonstrate her experience. Musel intervened in the conversation, saying that a young girl should not get involved in the politics of the empire. Fortunately, the father was willing to listen to his daughter's point of view before making a final decision. After all, Adriana had never been interested in financial matters before. Now was the perfect moment for the main character to finally express herself. The fact is that in the Kielce Empire to this day, there is no officially recognized crown prince. If Her Majesty is deposed or overcome by illness, no one will be able to repay the loan. In this case, they will probably bring in a new empress so that she can give birth to an heir. Then the Sarus will no longer be considered relatives of the emperor, and their position will be shaken. It turns out that if their family cannot return 3 million gold, it will be a big blow to the bank. The Cirrus clan actually failed to pay. A year later, the empress will die due to an accident, and an illegitimate crown prince will emerge. After weighing the pros and cons, the Duke still decided that he should reject the offer. If this family really had the opportunity to repay the debt, they could borrow money in the north of the empire from the Grunbeld Bank. Obviously, the bank manager should not have believed other people's promises so blindly. It was lucky that this time, the main character still managed to convince her father. Musel had no choice but to accept his shameful defeat. The main character was glad that this time the duchy would not be damaged. Adriana's father was surprised because even such deep thoughts had never occurred to him. The girl admitted that in secular society, there was a secret story circulating among young ladies about the relationship between the rulers of Kielce. The noblewoman hoped to change the future thanks to the knowledge acquired in the past. For starters, Adriana should have observed the inner workings of the bank more closely. The manager tried in every possible way to dissuade the visitor from further walks. The main character stated that she is old enough to make her own decisions. The girl began to open the door, but someone suddenly burst in from the opposite side. The face of the man who came inside seemed very familiar to the young noblewoman. The unfamiliar young man instantly charmed the main character with his beautiful gaze. Adriana felt as if she could already see this man somewhere. Having come to her senses, the girl awkwardly asked the stranger to let go of her hand. The bank manager looked with disbelief at the guy whom he saw for the first time in his life. The stranger did not hesitate to show tactlessness during the first meeting with his superiors. As it turned out, a young man named Ren came here to introduce himself because in the future he will work as a bank security guard. It was at this moment that the main character remembered who this impudent man was. Everyone present was surprised, because nobles usually do not have connections with such people. Having come to her senses in time, Adriana said that she had misplaced herself a little and mistook Ren for another person. This charming young man will join the Knights of the Duchy in a year. There will be a real buzz in the mansion because of his beautiful appearance and outstanding skills. Even in her past life, the main character tried never to cross paths with this person. Ren Salute carefully examined the young lady and asked if she wanted to tell him something. The smug young man suggested that such a beautiful lady could be interested in him. The girl, who was not going to tolerate such impudence, began to furiously deny the words spoken. The father, with a smile on his face, began to ask his daughter if she liked this knight. The duke very readily agreed that this young man was very noble and handsome. Muselle, who was in a complete stupor because of what was happening, began to sheepishly assent to the nobleman. The bank manager politely hinted to his new subordinate to leave the office. However, before leaving, the guy wanted to know if this charming lady had a name. The main character slowly extended her hand and awkwardly introduced herself to the stranger. Ren, who knew how to talk well with girls, behaved very respectfully with the noblewoman. The young man kissed the hand of his new friend and once again repeated his name. The girl couldn't believe that in a past life, this man had been such a scoundrel. Not wanting to burden herself with unnecessary memories, the main character decided to take advantage of the current situation. Adriana said that she just needed someone who could give her a short tour of the bank. In order to win the guy's favor, the girl decided to use a smile honed in social circles. It seemed to the main character that for some reason the young man was looking at her very strangely. Ren, who had no right to refuse the request, smiled politely at the girl. The duke suggested that young people now behave more daringly than 20 years ago. The father didn't want to admit it, but he was a little worried about his daughter's well-being. The young man who suddenly appeared seemed to be a clever but no less honest man at first glance. Key energy emanated from his body, which is very difficult to awaken these days. The duke did not expect that he would ever see such a young master again in his lifetime. The bank manager decided once again not to stand on ceremony and send the handsome young man to the very outback. Ren asked the young noblewoman what place she would like to see here. For some unknown reason, the night evoked very dubious emotions in the main character. Instead of spending her free time with a stranger, the girl expressed a desire to walk around the bank on her own. The smug young man immediately guessed that the noblewoman did not like the manager. It seemed as if the knight's red eyes knew absolutely everything. The young man once again smiled at the girl and said that he would be happy to help her. The main character became more irritable due to her arrogant insistence. The painful truth was that Adriana couldn't trust anyone other than her family. Even the smallest act of kindness, sooner or later, comes at a high price. Especially, you should never trust men whose intentions remain unknown. The main character could no longer wait for her to finally disappear from this man's sight. The girl believes that Ren suddenly appears and concentrates absolutely all attention on himself. Like stupid little fish, people are taken in by his refined manners and appearance. But one day, there will come a time when the young knight will never be able to shine again. The main character heard that this man died suddenly after tripping while hunting. However, in order to enjoy the wonderful moment, the girls will have to wait about 2 more years. As expected at first glance, there were absolutely no problems with the bank. Adriana thought that she would like to get to know the employees in more detail. Suddenly, while passing by the lady, the mysterious guy tripped and dropped all the papers. The main character awkwardly asked the stranger if he needed her help. the guy began to make excuses that because of his carelessness, he often gets into trouble. By his own mistake, the stranger mistook the noblewoman for an employee and asked her to sort out some papers. The girl was incredibly glad to have the opportunity to delve into the internal affairs of the bank. The papers that the main character was holding said that the department urgently needed new interns. The only daughter of Duke Fateria has the highest status among the local nobles. Because of this in the past, the girl was forced to attend all banquets and ceremonial meetings. No one asked Adriana if she wanted to fulfill her duty as First Lady. The noblewoman decided that in this life she would choose a completely different path for herself. The main character could only dream of becoming an employee of this bank. Workers could easily catch the girl in the act, since her face is too recognizable. Adriana even began to consider cutting her hair short. But even if a noblewoman changes her hairstyle, there will still be a person who will guess about her noble origin. Suddenly, the main character heard a quiet, unfamiliar voice behind her. A fairy appeared right next to the girl, claiming that with the help of magic, they could solve any problem. Of course, Adriana had never met magical creatures before in her life. The girl had heard about the existence of fairies, but was inclined to think that these were just rumors. The little magical creature was happy because Tanasiata's daughter could see her. The fairy, who could hardly hide her joy, rushed to hug the girl's face. Finally, a person appeared in this world who was able to see Celitia. As a good gesture, the main character decided to treat her little guest to a piece of cake. It turned out that Celitia came to this world with another fairy named Tanasiata. However, upon waking up, the little sorceress noticed the absence of her friend. Celitia, who had slept for only 100 years, could not believe that she had been abandoned so easily. The fairy suggested that the main character prepare, and then go in search of Tanasiata. The girl, who was completely uninvolved in this story, felt very awkward. The fact is that the main character could not be the daughter of Tanasiata, as the fairy claimed. However, Celitia was completely confident in her words, because she felt the corresponding energy from the girl. In addition, the box that Tanasiata gave to the fairy as a bed turned out to be a jewelry box that was passed down to Adriana from her mother as an inheritance. Before, the main character had never heard her mother Lucretia talk about small magical creatures. The girl first learned about fairies when she read a children's fairy tale from their family library. The story told how, having fallen in love with a person, the main character ceased to be a fairy. At the end of the tale, the once interracial couple had a beautiful child who became their main legacy. The main character asked an unfamiliar fairy how exactly she could contact her. Saul was forced to learn that even if Thanasiata turned into a human, most likely over all these years, her body turned to dust. Hearing such a bitter revelation, the little girl began to shed tears uncontrollably. Tanasiata made a promise to show the human world, but she never fulfilled it. Sol said that she felt very strange because she felt similar energy from Adriana. The main character, like Tanasiata, had hair the color of the rising sun and eyes like amethyst. If you think about it this way, the girl had previously heard rumors that her mother was related to fairies. In this case, it must have been about Thanasia, who was the great-grandmother of the main character. The fact is that this distant relative actually lived about 100 years ago. Having learned about the girl's relationship with fairies, little Celicia very quickly cheered up. The main character was definitely the great-granddaughter of Tanasiata. Since ordinary people cannot see magical creatures, everything that happened that the girl needed to digest seemed very strange. Sol claims that she slept in the box for 100 years, but in a past life, having decided to sell the jewelry after the collapse of the family, Adriana opened the box and saw no one there. Since the girl was very attentive, she couldn't just miss the fairy. Solitia interrupted the girl's thoughts, saying that it was time for her to leave. Since the fairy has learned of Thanasiata's fate, she must return to Wizendorf as quickly as possible. If they notice that Sol is left in the human world without a contractor, the queen will scold her. The little fairy was about to fly away, but the main character needed to find out something. The girl was very interested in the fact that Celicia could use magic for her own purposes. The main character expressed her desire to enter into an official contract with the little fairy. Celicia will have to cast magic on the new owner, and in return, she will be able to remain in the human world. What pleased the fairy most was that she could eat human cakes every day. The main character was already halfway to concluding an unequal contract with a magical creature. Fortunately, Celicia agreed to the proposed conditions without any doubt. Suddenly, the bank room began to fill with traces of close and cozy magic. Fairy Celicia asked the young noblewoman to pronounce her name in full to sign the contract. Smiling affectionately, the main character called herself Lady Adriana Erin Toscaria. As official confirmation of what was happening, the fairy applied a magical seal. Sol vowed to be Adriana's true friend until one of them terminated the contract. Now the main character, who had gone back in time, had to take care of one tiny magical creature. The noblewoman was not at all sure that her new subordinate's plan would work. It seemed as if, even in this form, someone would undoubtedly recognize the main characters. However, the fairy continued to convince her mistress that now she looks completely different. The girl should have gotten used to her new appearance and behaved more freely when surrounded by strangers. The main character was forced to lie to her maid to escape from the estate. Sol reassured the mistress, saying that her magic could only be recognized by a wizard of the ninth circle. Suddenly, the young noblewoman felt as if she was beginning to lose her balance. Without even apologizing, the unfamiliar man unceremoniously pushed the girl aside. The fairy tried her best not to teach this impudent man a lesson. Before, none of the residents of the duchy had dared to behave so rudely with the young lady. At first, the girl was outraged that people treated her completely differently. However, over time, she managed to get used to ordinary citizens who did not pay any attention to her. Throughout her life, Adriana was under the gaze of others, which was extremely tiring for her. Now, having changed her appearance, the girl could feel truly free for the first time. The main character asked the fairy to be quiet because they were about to enter the bank. Before Adriana even had time to cross the door threshold, she was immediately stopped. The security guard looked at the girl in disbelief, who did not look like a client at all. The young man said that there is a separate green door for employees located on the other side. Not wanting to stand on ceremony with the stranger, the guard roughly pushed the girl away and told her to go to hell. The main character noted that last time, the bank employees behaved more politely. Undoubtedly, Adriana could become free if she stopped living like the daughter of a duke. However, she will have to give up all the benefits she has received, because you can't get goodwill from people just like that. A few minutes later, the young noblewoman was finally able to find the office where the interview was held. The bank manager asked the girl if she could write, read, and use basic arithmetic. Fortunately, the main character had no problems with this since she was able to receive a basic education. The manager asked Adriana what her true purpose for coming to the bank was. The girl could not say that in fact she came here in order to prevent the collapse of the country. The bank employee immediately guessed the noble origin of the arriving stranger. Now the main character had long, shiny hair, and there were no tan marks on her soft hands. A girl who grew up in a rich family should not have the desire to work in such a place. People who dream of the luxurious life of a banker with gold coins in their hands, as a rule in reality, cannot get used to difficult work. The manager did not understand why she would hire employees who would later complain about working conditions. The woman asked Adriana if she had ever gone hungry and held a rag in her hands. A slacker should not waste other people's time, since the bank is a serious institution. However, the main character was not going to give up her goals and aspirations so easily. The noblewoman hasn't lived a hard life, but she has a reason why she can't give up. Then the main character admitted that she had to survive the death of her closest people. Since her parents are dead and there is no one left from the family, Adriana went to everyone she knew to pay off the debt. Since no one wanted to help, the girl had to trust one dangerous person. However, he turned out to be another traitor who wanted to take away the remaining property. That is why Adriana, like most people, was forced to hit rock bottom. But even despite the absence of difficulties listed by the managers, the main character did not come here with a light heart. The young lady had no intention of leaving this room until she was taken seriously. The manager began to have serious doubts, since the early girl said that she did not have education or recommendations in the banking industry. However, if a person can do basic calculations, he should be given one chance. The bank employee asked the girl how to pronounce her full name and initials. Fortunately, the main character managed to get her bearings in time, and name Rihanna. The manager said that when the girl worked for a year at the bank as an intern, she would have the opportunity to get a full-time job. After this, you will need to work for approximately 3 years to pass the official bank exam. The main character promised to do everything possible and become the best employees here. The manager sincerely hoped that the determination demonstrated was not a simple bluff. To begin with, the woman decided to take the new employee to a trial branch of their bank. Upon entering, the manager discovered that for some unknown reason, the cash register was empty. The employee became most angry when bank employees slept during working hours. In order not to be punished once again, the director began to make excuses guiltily. The main character immediately recognized the guy she had recently crossed paths with in the main department. The young director greeted the new employee of the trial branch with a smile on his face. The manager hit her boss with all her might because she was annoyed when employees smiled impudently in the workplace. The main character could hardly believe that this scandalous woman was the deputy. In addition to the director and manager, there was one more employee working in the trial branch. Since this place is a bank, each branch must have its own security. The manager said she sent the security guard on an errand for lunch, so he should be back soon. Hearing the name of another employee, the main character felt very surprised. Unfortunately, the girl's training will not be as serene as she originally expected. Adriana will have to get used to not only hard work, but also annoying employees. Ren, with bags in his hands, told the new employee that he was very pleased to meet you. Despite all her internal reluctance, the main character was forced to shake this man's hand. In order not to arouse unnecessary suspicion, the main character came up with a good alibi for herself. Of course, the little fairy who knows how to cast magic well happily played along with her new mistress. Soul, turning into a human, pretended to be a noblewoman who became friends with Adriana. The blue-haired girl claimed that she and her new friend were engaged in various embroidery and lace. The main character began to tell the nanny a fictional story about Mrs. Felm, who came from the Holy Empire. Adriana's new friend to jump into anything, but she still raised some doubts. Nanny Lucille said that the lady wanted to spend time with her. There was nothing wrong with that. The main character was sincerely happy because now she had the opportunity to secretly go to work. However, before leaving for walks, the girl needs to explain all this to Mrs. Schmidt. Worrying about the deaths of those closest to her, the main character completely forgot about this strict governess. Lucille said with a smile on her face that Mrs. Schmidt is an outstanding teacher. People say that this woman can play all the musical instruments in the world. The ladies and young men call her a person who came from the depths of the underworld. The fairy who had to pretend to be a human was counting on being treated to a cake. After some time, the main character was finally able to leave the mansion and go to work. However, thoughts of the evil Mrs. Schmidt could not leave the young lady's head. The teacher learned that due to other classes, the lesson time with Adriana would be significantly reduced. Of course, upon learning of this sad news, the stern woman instantly became furious. Even though the main character was untouchable, she felt extreme fear of this man. Mrs. Schmidt was indignant because Adriana could no longer keep up with the pace of her private lessons. The woman assumed that because of her laziness, the young noblewoman was trying to find an excuse not to attend classes. Other ladies study hard every day because they want to be a role model. Therefore, if the Duke's daughter does not show the same persistence, her family's reputation will be ruined. Even if the main character tried her best to master the educational material, every time there was some little thing that did not suit her teacher. Fortunately, Mrs. Schmidt, even despite her difficult character, could show leniency in some situations. The woman understood perfectly well that the young lady should be engaged not only in music, but also in other things. The teacher promised to shorten the lesson time, but in exchange, her students will have to practice twice as much. Now, the main character didn't even know whether she would be able to combine work with piano lessons. Suddenly, the branch guard Sir Ren himself appeared right in front of the girl. Although Adriana clearly did not like him, she still tried not to show her true feelings. Today was the main character's first day at work, which means she had no right to be distracted. Instead of leaving the girl alone, the guard continued to pester her with personal questions. The young man worked in this place for a very short time, but he was ready to happily help other people. The main character sincerely hoped that the friendly guard did not guess about her noble origin. Perhaps this annoying young man was so pleasant and attentive from the very beginning. Adriana, who had witnessed many instances of human rudeness over the past few days, sincerely thanked the guard. Ren would have been happy to continue their conversation, but the deputy director unexpectedly entered the office. The woman believed that the new employee would run away on her first day of work after hearing rumors. All previous interns couldn't even last a month in this position. It is no secret that in such institutions, employees have many different responsibilities. The deputy director asked the girl to figure out for herself why trainees quit so often. The woman was sure that 2 heads were enough to solve this riddle before the end of the working day. Since the deputy needed to leave, she asked to seek help from the director if necessary. Still, the main character hoped that she would be able to cope with all the responsibilities on her own. The girl must serve all the guests well and fulfill the instructions of her manager. After all, my hunch was that Adriana would sooner or later be able to become a full-time employee. Since after a few hours, the girl began to look very tired. The guard tried to distract her. The main character, at first, awkwardly makes excuses about the fact that she was not sleeping, but was busy with work duties. The young man said that since practically no people come to this place, it is very boring here. It turned out that about 4 clients came to this branch last week. In order to cheer up her sleepy brain, the girl began to think about the riddle of the deputy director. The main character suggested that the dismissal of the interns was due to the severity of the manager. Since there were no guests, the girl had a lot of time to think. Adriano could not understand at all why this unpopular branch continued to exist. The young noblewoman decided to turn to the notes she made during a short training. Manager Hortensia probably said something useful at the first training session. Having finished her deep thoughts, the main character suddenly jumped to her feet. The girl suggested that under the current circumstances, she would never be able to become a full-time employee. Rihanna's job responsibilities at the bank include exchanging currencies, issuing loans and funds, opening an account, consulting on loans, and the like. These are operations in the customer department. Simply put, in her position, the main character should be involved in attracting guests. However, the problem was that the branch where the girl worked was actually empty. If there are not enough clients, Adriana will never be able to become a full-time employee. Of course, such a situation had a very detrimental effect on the girl's future career. During the absence of the deputy director, none of the clients visited the branch. The main character swore that she would do everything possible for her job. Moreover, the young noblewoman is unlikely to be able to get another position in this bank. Hortense said indifferently that she just needed someone to watch the cash register. Unfortunately, even despite all the determination of the main character, things were very deplorable. The girl suggested that first, she needed to start by spreading information about the bank. Nevertheless, the main characters were very lucky as they finally found a client who wanted to visit this branch. Jumping up from her seat with a joyful smile on her face, the young employee greeted the client. It turned out that Mrs. Schmidt, the teacher of the Duke's daughter, came for consultation. The main character, without letting it show, asked what exactly the client would like to know. The upset woman announced her intention to get a financial loan. Adriano was very surprised since she did not suspect that her teacher could have such problems. It became obvious from the woman's expression that she was very afraid of being rejected by the bank. The old teacher did not have enough money to support herself, so she wanted to get money as bail. The main character found the situation very strange, since Mrs. Schmidt taught a lot of children in noble families. The girl awkwardly asked the woman what exactly she would like to leave as collateral. Obviously, something very serious had happened to Mrs. Schmidt if she was willing to give her house to the bank. The worker had to go with Wren to the apartment to check the deposit procedure. As it turned out, Mrs. Schmidt's housing was quite good in many respects. However, it would be much more profitable to sell the house rather than keep it as collateral. Mrs. Schmidt does not have a spouse, so she could live comfortably in a small place. The guard told the main character to leave her thoughts for later and leave as quickly as possible. Strange people, who obviously were not friendly neighbors, surrounded the woman and the bank employees. It turned out that all this time, the villains were waiting for the owner of the house to return home. Strangers with guns in their hands demanded that the woman return some money to them. It turned out that, in fact, the old teacher was in big trouble in her life. The dangerous men advised not to cross their path, as otherwise someone would get into serious trouble. The main character did not know at all what to do in this case, because they were surrounded by 4 people. The men ordered the guard not to interfere in other people's affairs, and to quickly leave this place. Wren, who had no fear at all, said that he wouldn't even move. After the words were spoken, the young guard instantly launched an attack on one of the opponents. The frightened men asked their comrade if he had received any dangerous injuries. "Just a few weak blows are enough to show the scoundrels where their place is," Before the girl had not even thought about how strong her employee was, the formidable extortionists decided to try their luck and attack the young knight again. Obviously, these people did not hesitate to attack a single person in a large group. The men, for some reason, believed in their own strength, rushed straight into the attack. Fortunately, after just a few seconds, the young man was able to defeat all opponents. However, one extortionist pretending to be defeated decided to launch a second attack. First, the man swung and then tried to attack the main character with a sword. But he failed to strike as the guard intervened in time and saved the girl. Fortunately, the conflict ended on a positive note for bank employees. The girl's body continued to rise in price because today's situation was very dangerous. If it were not for Ren, who was ready to risk his safety, the conflict probably could have turned into a real crime. While fleeing, the bandits swore that they would not give up so easily and would take revenge in the future. Even after such humiliation, the extortionists continued to snarl at the guard. The main character was once again convinced that Ren is strong not only physically, but also in spirit. Adriana became very agitated when the brave young man tried to start a dialogue with her. After some time, Mrs. Schmidt finally returned to her dear guests. The woman came not empty-handed, but with a tray of freshly baked cookies. The noblewoman thought that these sweets looked too cute for the strict teacher. Mrs. Schmidt apologized guiltily because she didn't have many goodies at home. The circumstances seemed very awkward, so the main character tried to break the silence. First, you need to understand the situation and understand who those nasty people were. The guard explained that such characters often borrow money and then demand it back with huge interest. Apparently, because the debt became too high, the teacher decided to take extreme measures and went to the bank. The woman felt guilty because it was her fault that the bank employees were put in danger. The main character sincerely tried to understand a person who had previously been a complete mystery to her. Suddenly, the guests heard loud children's voices asking them to leave Mrs. Schmidt alone. 5 children rushed into the room and began to loudly complain to the bank employees. Mrs. Schmidt tried to calm the older girl Gerda, who was the first to make a fuss. The woman began to explain to the children that these people came here to provide help. The main character was very surprised because before Mrs. Schmidt seemed to her to be a lonely woman. It turns out that all this time, the strict teacher was a mother of many children. Active is a small kingdom in the northwest of the continent where wars for imperial power continued for many years. Of course, it was very difficult for ordinary people to live in the current circumstances. In the end, Mrs. Schmidt's husband, like all men, went to fight for the kingdom. It seemed to the young people in love as if their reverent feelings would never fade. After some time, the woman learned that very soon she would become a mother. However, one unfortunate incident happened, after which life changed completely. Unfortunately, Mrs. Schmidt's husband was one of the first to die in the brutal confrontation between the two states. The misfortunes did not end, and the child who was the memory of his beloved was born dead. The war took not only the lives of loved ones, but also the soul of a lonely woman. However, hope was revived the day Mrs. Schmidt heard a child crying on the street. The woman felt that she should be the one to take these orphans and give them a new home. This was the family that Mrs. Schmidt frankly needed for many years. In order to protect her children, the music teacher decided to cross the border and go to another state. Gerda fell ill with pneumonia, and therefore the woman was forced to borrow money in order to pay for treatment. The main character felt sad, because before she had no idea about the difficult fate of her teacher. The security guard said that knowing all the circumstances, the woman would no longer be able to get a loan from the bank. The amount is very large, and there is practically no possibility of repaying it. Ren advised them to forget about it since they still couldn't do anything about the current situation. For the first time in her life, Adriano saw such a sincere smile on Mrs. Schmidt's face. The main character knew that since she was the daughter of a duke, she could not act rashly. Rihanna, who recently got a job at a bank, also did not have deep experience. Cases where a loan is not approved due to general requirements are very common. The girl was sorry because, unlike Ren, she could not understand Mrs. Schmidt's situation. The main character swore that she would do everything possible to find a way to solve the problem. Hearing the words spoken, the young man was surprised because he did not expect such a reaction from the new employees. Adriana was the kind of person who would never give up under any circumstances. The girl swore that she would not sleep that night until she found the optimal solution to the problem. However, the young lady could not even imagine that developing ideas could be so tedious. The next day, the main character of this story looked like a real zombie. Ren, who didn't particularly want to show sympathy, began to laugh loudly at what he saw. It was very noticeable that the bank employee spent the entire night in deep thought. In order to find a solution to the problem, it is necessary to review the entire manual. The brave young man could only look at his ambitious employee with sympathy. Yet despite all the difficulties that arose, the main character was able to find a way to solve the problem. However, in order to carry out her plan, the girl needed a little help from someone. Mrs. Schmidt's mischievous children began to pester the cute security guard with questions. The eldest girl asked the other children to calm down and not disturb their guest. Now, Mrs. Schmidt and the bank employee were talking about very important financial issues. The woman absolutely could not believe that someone could solve her problem. However, the main character was completely confident in her strategy, namely the refinancing system. This system of paying off debts or overdue loans with a new loan. It turns out, for starters, Mrs. Schmidt must pay off her debt to her moneylender. There should be no problems with this task, since the bank will sort out the debt. In this way, all funds borrowed by Mrs. Schmidt will be successfully repaid. In order to return the money, the client will make a transaction for a new loan with the bank. Since this will be a new agreement, the interest on the loan will be much lower this time. Mrs. Schmidt will no longer have absurd loans, so she does not have to take on new debt to pay off the debt. Unfortunately, interest must be paid, but this is not a very high amount. The woman, who could hardly contain her emotions, rushed to the girl with hugs. Adriana was happy because now Mrs. Schmidt could continue to live with her family. In the Duchy of Fetheria, it is possible to receive a subsidy for a private orphanage. This is very convenient, since the state will be able to take on part of the costs for food and accommodation. The woman, who was able to feel happy for the first time in a long time, cried with happiness. Fortunately, this touching family story has a good ending. Bank employees, having completed their duties, could finally return to the branch. Ren, who had been playing the role of a child's toy all this time, felt very tired. Now workers need to go to the mysterious Sandro, a man who issues loans with incredibly high interest rates. In order to carry out the plan, it is necessary to obtain the consent of this person. The main character was afraid that their acquaintance would ultimately end in conflict or even a fight. Ren asked his partner not to worry about trifles and to finally trust him. The girl began to explain herself because she did not want her words to sound offensive. The security guard warned the bank employee to be alert and not leave him for long. Dubious individuals began to comment on the girl's presence, since young ladies usually did not visit such places. Plucking up determination, the main character stated that she had come here to meet Sandro. The bandit was surprised because usually before coming, people make an appointment with him. The guys, who had recently gotten into a fight with a bank security guard, were quietly gloating behind their master's back. A bank employee said that Mrs. Schmidt approached them with a request to refinance the loan. In other words, the girl came here in order to obtain consent for this procedure. The bandit believed that the bank did not have the proper right to repay other people's loans in this way. The main character asked the extortionists to reduce their appetites and not to intimidate innocent people. Of course, Sandro could not come to terms with the fact that some stranger was behaving so impudently. The bandits were not going to tolerate the way bank employees were trying to interfere with their business. Adriana said that people who live by feeding on the suffering of others have absolutely no right to exist. If Sandro had even a drop of humanity, he would not mock the common people like that. The bandit asked his subordinate to punish the guests for their impudent behavior. The main character was afraid that her comrade would not be able to defeat the 2-meter thug. However, the brave young man began to calm the girl down because he had everything under control. It already happened that before the bandit Pin took part in a duel with the knight Ren, the frightened man, who did not want unnecessary trouble, quickly backed up. If the bandit had previously known that this guy would be the enemy, he would not have taken this assignment. Now that Sandro was defenseless, things began to develop completely differently. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the main character asked the bandit to sign some papers. The man was scared because this girl with large circles under her eyes looked very menacing. The bank employees were sincerely happy that they had finally managed to complete their first case. Adriana sincerely thanked her partner for the help provided, without which she would hardly have been able to cope. Still, even despite his bad character, this young man turned out to be a very good person. It is worth recognizing that if it were not for Ren, the main character would probably have become a victim of bandits. Suddenly, the brave knight stopped the bank employee and looked carefully into her eyes. With a gentle smile on his face, the young man asked the girl to be more careful on the way back. Adriana thought that this charming guy continued to be a big mystery to her. Sandro continued to be angry because of the cunning bank employees who pressed him against the wall. Suddenly, the angry moneylender heard quiet footsteps right behind him. As it turned out, Ren came here to resolve some issues with the bandit. The man caught in an insidious trap continued to flounder and call for help. Ren smiled slyly because there was not a single soul in the room that could help the nasty bandit. The moneylender tried to understand why the guard returned to him, intending to take revenge. The young man admitted that, in fact, he would like to protect one loved one. Having guessed who exactly he was talking about, the man promised not to touch the bank employee. However, the knight was not going to save the life of a man who could be potentially dangerous to others. It is much easier to kill a person than to believe his stupid false promises. Fortunately, Mrs. Schmidt, who had recently experienced severe stress, did not lose heart at all. The strict teacher continued to accuse the noblewoman of not wanting to work hard to improve her musical skills. Adriana, noticing the smile on the woman's face, felt obvious satisfaction. The girl suggested out loud that something very good must have happened in Mrs. Schmidt's life. The teacher always became very happy when she remembered her children. The main character asked Mrs. Schmidt to tell more about her children. The woman resisted slightly, as she did not want to burden the noblewoman with personal stories during class. The thing is, Adriana was going to take advantage of the chance to take a little break from music. The strict teacher began to enthusiastically talk about her happy and very large family. In order to somehow increase the number of clients, the main character tried to advertise the branch. Unfortunately, distributing leaflets was an extreme measure that the girl did not want to resort to at all. Several clients who knew Mrs. Schmidt came, but the situation still did not change. The main character hoped until the very end that there would be people nearby interested in the bank's services. It would be very nice if the security guard also got involved and started helping. Adriana stated that she had handed out all the flyers, which meant Ren could stop pretending to be asleep. The knight who underestimated the girl's observation skills raised his eyes guiltily. For some reason, most of the employees at this branch tried their best to avoid work. Fortunately, one client still appeared who wanted to get advice from the bank. The main character greeted her new visitor with a bright smile on her face. It turned out, like most clients, this man wanted advice about a loan. However, there was one small detail that completely haunted the girl. Analyzed her memories, the main character realized that she knew this man. Ironically, all the people who came to this branch for consultation were acquaintances of the noblewoman. The main character should have calmed down, because she worked undercover in a bank. The visitor said that he would like to organize a small business. This man left the Duke's family in order to open his own store. Adamo was a very talented pastry chef working as a rule in noble families. The main character, who knew this man since childhood, did not even doubt the purity of his heart. As a bank employee, Adriana asked the visitor if he had taken out any loans before. Relieved, the man said that he had never borrowed money from anyone before. The employee asked to fill out brief personal information about her place of work and salary. After just a few minutes, the visitor gave the bank employee the paper with all the necessary data. After reviewing the information provided, the main character came to the conclusion that the pastry chef was trying to hide his real place of work. The indicated income was quite high for a person working in the food industry. It turned out that the man did not even have a wife or children for whom he could earn money. The girl did not understand why, despite having no family and no debts, the pastry chef had not saved up enough money. It turns out that after quitting his previous job, the man was forced to spend all his money somewhere. Adriana sincerely hoped that this wonderful man did not get into any trouble. The main character asked her client to come tomorrow, as she needed time to check all the information provided in more detail. Hearing that he would have to wait for some time, the man began to get very worried. Obviously, the client wanted to consult as quickly as possible in order to better understand his situation. Suddenly, the pastry chef became angry and then attacked the young employee with his fists. The security guard intervened in time and knocked the client, who smelled of alcoholic beverages, to the floor. The young man began to threaten the man because if he did not leave the branch voluntarily, other employees would have to force him out. The main character decided that she first needed to listen to the client and then draw hasty conclusions. The pastry chef, who could only dream of owning his own bakery, shed bitter tears in front of his workers. Ren insisted that this client could be a very dangerous person. However, the main character was not going to deprive the client of her last hope so easily. The girl believed that service personnel should be able to find an approach to every person without exception. The man who had behaved aggressively not long ago instantly softened in front of the staff. The fact is that since the pastry chef worked in the Duke's family, his pastry shop flourished. Sometimes, due to a shortage of hands, a man had to hire more permanent employees. Revenue for one working day in a candy store could be about 1,000 gold coins. But at some point, the man was forced to face some financial difficulties. For some unknown reason, all the money I earned began to gradually disappear. As a result, through his own fault, the confectioner was unable to save his small enterprise from collapse. Unfortunately, the man had no choice but to close the bakery. The pastry chef admitted that he did not have the slightest guess where all the money could have disappeared. With tears in his eyes, he begged for help to reopen the business. The main character believed that such a problem definitely had to have some reason. The young man, who was still worried about his colleague's well-being, suggested that she apply a cold handkerchief to the bruise. Adriano thanked the guard and then began her work duties. For a long time, the girl could not understand why her partner had become so silent and calm. Ren hoped that the main character would come to her senses in time and would not help this impudent man. According to the guy, such people should first cure alcoholism and then start running a business. Moreover, even if you close your eyes to the aggressive behavior, the man still seemed very strange. The girl agreed with this. However, she could not ignore people who were faced with grief and disappointment in their lives. Most people in our world have been forced to experience true despair in one way or another. Adriana, having lost all her relatives, hoped that she could meet a person who would show her mercy. In a world of aggressive people who want each other to die, it is very important to keep warm inside yourself. Every person hopes that in a moment of despair, someone will extend their hand to him. Even if you provide the most insignificant help, the desperate can experience hope again. The main character was ready to use any chance to help those in need. In addition, the girl understood well what it was like when, due to certain circumstances, you have to give up the dream of your whole life. However, the knight, who cared exclusively about close people, did not understand his colleague at all. The guy decided that he needed to try to help in order to gain more trust in the eyes of others. Ren promised to do everything possible and protect the girl from dangerous individuals. Every day, this young man seemed more noble in the eyes of the young employee. Suddenly, the deputy entered the office, dragging the director along with her. The manager threatened the employees that if they did not perform their work duties, they would have to undergo a re-education program, along with the rest of the lazy people who preferred to sleep in the workplace. If you don't find out the true reason, then even after receiving a loan, the situation will repeat itself. The fairy suggested that the pastry chef should start working for the ducal family. The main character told Soul to quickly hide because her younger brother was knocking on her room. The girl did not take into account that since her little minion is a fairy, other people, even if they wanted to, would not be able to see her. Entering the room, the young man was very surprised, as it seemed to him as if he heard someone else's voice. The younger brother informed his sister that there would be a banquet this Saturday, so she needed to prepare for the event. The father must have organized this event in order to find a wife for his son. After all, the young man was now at the age when he needed to think about creating his future family. Suddenly, the main character noticed her younger brother making notes in a notebook. Adriana crept closer to her brother to see what he was doing right now. It turned out that the brother was recording information about preparations for the upcoming banquet. The young man tried, if possible, to write down all the wishes that his sister expressed. Also, among the pages of the notebook, a special column was drawn with all structured expenses. It was at this moment that the main character realized that she needed to find an account book in order to deal with all the financial reports during the operation of the candy store. Adriana sincerely thanked her brother for the inspiration and the most wonderful idea. At that moment, the girl was happy, because it seemed to her that from now on, all the investigations would go like clockwork. However, she had no idea how much suffering would be accompanied by her further, very boring work. To begin with, a bank employee decided to personally visit the place of work of pastry chef Adamo. As it turned out before, the man had not even thought about starting to keep a ledger and carefully monitor all expenses. Fortunately, the unlucky pastry chef still figured out to save some of the receipts. In order to have some fun at his workplace, the security guard decided to help his colleague. Moreover, having completed all the tasks, they will be able to quickly close the branch and go home. The young man asked the girl how exactly she figured out to look at the ledger. Then the main character admitted that one of her friends has a hobby of decorating a book of expenses and income at home. Apparently, Adriana's brother was quite good at structuring various information. Suddenly, the girl noticed how the look of a smug employee settled on her face. Having come to his senses, the guy tried to quietly look away to the side in order to get rid of all suspicions. The main character noted that Adamo has problems not only with the preparation of the ledger, but also with receipts. The girl began to ask the man about his past income. However, as it turned out, he could not remember practically anything about this. Money from the sale of confectionery products is not the same as earned money. It is necessary to take into account not only the total profit, but also all material costs. Some of these expenses include the cost of ingredients, packaging, employee costs, and rent for workspace. The amount that remains after eliminating all of the above items is net profit. The girl explained that the income was negative, so instead of earning money, the man had to spend it on various expenses. The employee who was about to represent the information looked carefully at the client. Since the pastry chef did not have any distinction between personal and work expenses, he needs to start dividing all the funds he received into two categories. In addition, considering the cost of ingredients, the cost of culinary products is too low. The main character tried to explain to the man that he needed to radically change his approach to doing business. Adriana also wanted to know exactly why the cost of renting housing instantly increased. The confectioner did not suspect anything at all, although the contract was initially unprofitable. At first, the man tried to turn a blind eye to the sudden increase in prices, but over time, the cost began to be completely unaffordable for him. In the end, the confectioner had no choice but to close his small business. To explain it in simple words, Adamo is completely unable to distinguish between profits and expenses. Because of his good nature, the pastry chef simply could not adapt to the harsh reality. For most of his adult life, this man lived peacefully in the Duke's residence. The young man sincerely loved his work, so he always tried to succeed and achieve the favor of others. The girl understood perfectly well that in order to run a profitable business, a person needs to have a good understanding of today's realities of life. The man with hope in his eyes asked the employee if he would have the opportunity to get a loan from the bank. Thanks to a stable income in the life of a pastry chef, the main character can still do something. However, it is worth considering whether such a decision makes sense, since the man may again fail to cope with his responsibilities and lose the business forever. The desperate man came to the conclusion that he would still have to come to terms with his situation in life. The main character, to begin with, suggested that the pastry chef keep a ledger at home, recording all household expenses and income. Obviously, this method is the best solution to the current problem. The man, who was not confident in his abilities, admitted his incompetence in this matter, but the girl insisted that they could try to solve this problem together. The pastry chef was afraid to make a mistake again, since after the second failure, he would not be given another chance. Shedding a tear of happiness, the client stated that he completely trusted the decisions of bank employees. Before the next consultation, the main character asked the pastry chef to cut down on his expenses and stop drinking alcohol. The girl believed that if you push a person correctly, he will be able to cope with all life's obstacles. The security guard immediately noticed how his employee's facial expression began to change. The young lady, who was doing a wonderful job with her work duties, continued to glow with happiness. Suddenly, the main character stopped in the middle of the road and then pulled the guy by the hand. The girl, with a smile on her face, said that before going home and starting to prepare for tomorrow's workday, she would like to show something. Having found a secluded place among the busy streets, Adriana decided to share some cakes with the guard. The main character demonstrated Zeppola Adamo, which began to gain popularity in one of the local pastry shops. The young man, not interested in sweets, showed absolute indifference to the cake. The guard was initially not interested in the taste of the buns, but in helping an innocent person. The bank employee continued to insist that Ren must try this cake. Scrubbing his sole, the young man took a small bun in order to place it in his mouth. The young knight, at the request of his colleague, tried to enjoy the powdered sugar and crispy crust. The main character, who absolutely could not shut up, continued to praise the freshly baked cake. The guard had to agree that this delicacy indeed had a unique taste. In order to achieve such a result, Adamo was forced to work like hell in the kitchen throughout his entire life. He worked backbreakingly for years because he wanted to give culinary pleasure to ordinary people. If a person fails, once this does not mean that he will have to fail again. Rihanna had a dream for her entire life. Ren immediately guessed that this topic was quite painful for his interlocutor. Sometimes, in order to realize your own desires, you need to risk your well-being and comfort. The drooping girl began to think about what she would like most in this life. Even before the moment when the fate of the main character was covered in darkness, she had many desires in her life. Most of all, the young lady wanted to marry her beloved and create a happy family. However, after her imminent death, the main character had to radically change her life priorities. In order not to experience severe mental pain again, the girl decided to forever abandon her intentions to love someone. Adriana knew that such dreams only clouded the mind and lulled vigilance. Therefore, instead of telling the truth, the girl decided to lie a little to the guard. The main character, wanting to divert unnecessary attention from herself, asked her colleague the same question. The young man admitted that from a very early age, he dreamed of gaining freedom. Therefore, while working as a mercenary, the knight had the honor of visiting many cities outside the duchy. Let Reina begin in the west of the continent and end in the desert city where the southern Sezerans gather. Because of his habit of walking aimlessly, the young man did not stay anywhere for more than a year. However, Fetria became the exception for which Ren wandered the world for so long. The guy extended his hand to the bank employee and said that they should go home already. The main character felt her little heart begin to flutter uncontrollably. Adriana suggested that her interlocutor must be very good at lying. The security guard asked the girl how she felt about men who often lie. The main character admitted that she likes noble and very frank people.